First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference, to this Staffan Lindeberg Memorial. It's for me an honor to be here, sharing the floor with professionals I really admire, from whom I learn every day. And also, thank you very much for being here. Without you, that wouldn't make any sense, wouldn't be possible. I'm going to talk today about cooking technique as a confounder, possible confounder in nutrition studies. And I chose this image here because when I see epidemiology, I can't help but thinking about juggling sometimes, juggling with the data and with statistics. And you know that in epidemiology there are many possible, especially in nutrition, many possible confounders. But I think that cooking technique is one overlooked confounder in this case. I can't help, of course, but starting with a short mention to evolution and cooking. We know that cooking has been key to our evolution as humans. Ainara has hinted that this morning. And we know that every population around the world, every traditional population around the world cooks their food. There's no other population in the world that doesn't cook their food, that eats raw food, but only some Westerners. As Fritz said this morning, we have the habit of screwing things up. And, well, we can find some people who follow a raw food diet, the raw food pyramid, okay? But we know there's evidence that diet composed of only raw food can't provide enough energy to sustain good health. We have, for example, this study by Catherine Koepnick in Germany in more than 500 raw foodists, where she found the following. Here you have the percentage of raw food in the diet, okay? And on the left axis you have the BMI. And you can see how, as a percentage of raw food increases in their diet, the BMI decreases. It drops, and at 100% raw food diet, we have BMI close or under being normal weight. They are underweight, in fact, okay? And on the right-hand side, you have also, they analyzed the percentage of women with amenorrhea. And half the women following a completely raw diet had amenorrhea. The period disappeared. And this makes all sense because in an environment where there's not enough energy to sustain all the body functions, reproduction is one of the body functions that it's not essential for short-term survival. So it makes sense that this is switched off, let's say. So these raw foodists didn't get enough energy from the diet. But to me, it's more important in this study the following. There was no difference among vegan, vegetarian, or omnivore raw foodists. So the key here was cooking their food. There was a huge difference between the people who cooked their food or people who didn't. Meat didn't make a difference, meat or fish. Okay. And this result has been also reproduced in other cohorts, this one in the United States. And we see the same thing. Both female or male vegan or omnivores who cook their food have BMI which is normal or close to normal. But those who don't cook their food, in this case they were vegan raw foodists, because usually it's associated with a vegan diet. Those who adopted a raw food diet, female or male, both were again close to being underweight. So this result is also confirming that a raw food diet can't provide enough energy from our food. And this makes again sense because cooking our food can increase the amount of energy we can obtain from it because of different processes like mechanical processing, both during cooking and during thermal processing, and also how it affects the different macronutrients like starch gelatinization, collagen denaturation, or fat emulsification. All those processes increase the amount of energy we can obtain from our food. And on the other hand, cooking can also affect how we deal with micronutrients. And we have this good example on carotenoid absorption from carrots. In the first column, you have raw carrots, and you can see that this is an in vivo study, okay, in vivo study, absorption in vivo study. And you can see that raw carrots, we absorb a marginal amount of carotene. When you cook them whole, this increases to 6%. Then when you crush them, even when they are raw, we go up to 21. When they're cooked and crushed, 27. And when you add some oil and you cook them, this goes up to almost 40% because it's a fat-soluble vitamin, and of course, adding fat will improve the absorption of this vitamin in the digestive tract. And also, on the other hand, we can have a loss of micronutrients depending on the cooking technique. In this case, this is a nice example, in my opinion, because the researchers analyzed the loss of tocopherol vitamin E from in boiled peas compared to raw peas. And what they found was, if you look at the total tocopherol amount, you can see that when they cooked those peas in an iron steel pot, there was a loss of about more than 40% of the tocopherol. But when they cooked it in a glass pot, there was almost no loss of tocopherol. This is because trace metals coming from the pot, from this steel pot, can catalyze the oxidation of those tocopherols, inducing this loss. So you can see that only changing the material of your pot can change the tocopherol you get from those peas in 40%. Okay, so, just examples. And we know that water is also a huge enemy of water-soluble vitamins, the B vitamins and the vitamin C. In this study, for example, there was a huge difference in the loss of folate depending on the ratio of spinach to water. When this ratio was 1 to 1.6, there was a 30% loss of folate, but when they used 1 to 7 ratio, 7 parts of water for 1 of spinach, you can see that this loss came up to 80%, more than 80%. So the more water you use, the more folate you're losing. And this is very common in the household. And if you also add the effect of how you preserve your food, how you have it in your freezer, for example, there are also losses depending on how you preserve the food. In this case, this is broccoli, but this is also the same for spinach, for green beans, in this study by Óscar. After 6 months in the freezer, okay, there's a loss of almost more than 90% of the folate. In this case, in broccoli, it's the same for spinach. And after 3 months, it's almost a quarter loss of folate. So if we think about what we do every day in our homes, or maybe our patients, or maybe in a research setting, it's very common in a household cooking that someone goes home, takes a pack of spinach from the freezer, throws it in the water to boil, then throws away the water, and eats the spinach, thinking that it's getting a lot of folate from those green vegetables. And maybe it's getting none or very, very little, okay? So this is very important. Cooking technique is very important, and it's almost always forgotten in nutrition studies. Another example, microwave heating of meat and of dairy, especially milk, can induce a loss of vitamin B12 of about 34% in just 5 to 6 minutes. This is one of the few examples, at least I know, of a direct effect on a nutrient by microwave radiation. Vitamin B12 gets transformed into hydroxy vitamin B12, which doesn't have the activity, the vitamin activity. It's not toxic, it's okay, but it loses their activity. So it's interesting also. We do this every day at home. And this is a mess of a slide, I know. It's against all the recommended things, not many data. But the idea for you is to see that for minerals also, any kind of processing of food can induce a loss of most minerals. Even preparing a salad, just washing vegetables and cutting them, chopping them to make a salad can induce some loss of minerals. So this can be also important, as you can see here, reaching more than 50% for most minerals, for example, in a hamburger, just cutting the meat, heating the meat, and so on. On the other hand, we know that cooking, we saw that with carotenoids and carrots, cooking can increase the bioavailability of micronutrients. And we know, for example, that in brassicas, cooking them can increase the absorption of iron, for example, more than 200%. And this is due to tissue disruption, protein denaturalization, and also the liberation of organic acids from the vegetable that can increase the absorption of iron. So we have two different effects: loss of nutritional value on one hand, and increased bioavailability of these vitamins and minerals. So we have two opposing effects. Here, if we plot the concentration of a micronutrient, can be mineral, can be vitamin, against time and temperature when cooking one food, we can see that usually there's a loss of that mineral, of that vitamin, due to thermal destruction, to solubilization, to many different, to oxidation, many different processes. But on the other hand, there's an increase in the bioavailability of that food due to many different processes we have seen. So the sweet spot will be around here. That will be the optimal point, because we minimize losses and we maximize the bioavailability. But this is very difficult to do. You can't do that for every single nutrient on every single food. But we have data, as we have seen before, that can give us an indication of the proper or the best technique to cook different foods. So after seeing all that, I've been working on this for about 2 years, developing some teaching programs. But it's only recently that all this data made me think, can we then trust food composition tables and software? Because cooking has such a dramatic effect on the nutritional value of food that maybe this is not taken into account. Well, we are going to see now some examples. This is a Japanese study where they calibrated, they evaluated the nutritional value of the same diet with two different versions of their food tables, the old ones and the updated ones. There were changes. They updated the food tables. And they found that there were important differences, especially, for example, as you can see here, for iron, more than 200% variation between one table and the other. Or for cholesterol, like 73% here. For energy, usually, and micronutrients, there are not such big differences. But for micronutrients, and I think it's due to the processes we've seen before, there are big differences many times. This is a study from a good friend of mine, Dr. Ismael Samauro in Madrid. And he compared 7 different food composition tables or software commonly used in Spain to calibrate diets in the clinical setting or in research. And he found the same thing for different nutrients, different micronutrients especially. There were huge differences. For example, in this case for vitamin B12. And well, all of them were above the recommended daily intake. So maybe you can think, okay, well, for a clinical setting, it doesn't make much difference. They are all above. But there are other cases where it's under the recommended intake. And also I think that this is very important for research. This does make a difference for research. And we have also studies comparing not just one food table or software against the other, but comparing the results from calibrating a diet or assessing a diet with food tables against chemical analysis. They took their food, they took the diet, samples from the diet, and they analyzed it in the laboratory. And what we have here is the EM, it's the estimated versus the measured ratio, okay? E is the estimated value of those nutrients, and M is the measured ratio in the laboratory. And you can see here what we said before. And this is what you can find in different studies as well, that for energy, more or less, the estimation is okay. For macronutrients, the estimation is more or less okay. But for micronutrients, you can find, again, huge differences. And usually, food tables and software tend to overestimate the amount of vitamins, of minerals in food, because it doesn't take into account many times cooking, how you cook the food. But even you can think, well, then the gold standard is chemical analysis. But there have been some studies with interlaboratory tests where the same food sample was sent to different laboratories to check if they got the same value in the chemical analysis. This is the Eurofoods trial in 2004, and they found a difference for protein of up to 6.4%, not too bad. They found difference for fat up to 54%, for carbohydrates up to 27%, and for fiber up to 84%. I think this is worrying. I don't know what you think, but I mean, this is surprising. When I saw this, I was really surprised. How can this huge difference be there, between different labs? This is another example on an interlaboratory assessment of folate in different foods. In this case, it's in fortified cereals, breakfast cereals. And you can see again that there are very marked differences between the results in folate assessment. Some of the labs used single enzyme extraction, some did 3 enzyme extraction, which is now recommended. But, well, here you have the recommended 400 micrograms of folate every day. No? Well, in this case, we can see that some are above, some are below. So, I don't know. To me, this is confusing. This is actually confusing. And we also have another effect of cooking on our food that could be a confounder, a potential confounder in nutritional studies, which is the production of some substances like acrylamide, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, heterocyclic amines, or other substances due to high temperatures, due to roasting food and burning food. And we know that some of those substances are suspects or even confirmed carcinogens like benzoyl-A-parine, for example. And they could maybe affect the outcome of some epidemiological studies on cancer and also on inflammation, because we know that advanced glycation end products and advanced lipoxidation end products produced due to these thermal processes could affect also the inflammatory pathways and induce a low level of inflammation in the long term. So take-home messages. Cooking can affect very dramatically the energy status of subjects in a clinical setting or also in a research setting. It can affect especially the amount of micronutrients, of vitamins and minerals due to losses, but also on the other hand, if done properly, could increase the nutritional value. Food tables do have limitations. Software has limitations when you're trying to calibrate diets or to assess the nutritional value of a diet. We have to take this into account. Chemical analysis is not, unfortunately, it's not always that reliable. We have seen that with interlaboratory tests. And I think this is well, it's not only my opinion, all the researchers think this. There's a need for standardization. Sometimes we criticize the food industry because they produce these ultra-processed foods and so on, which are not, in theory, very good for health, but after the Twinkie diet experiment, we don't know. But we usually criticize them. But I think we have to learn in research a lot from them, especially regarding standardization, to avoid this kind of uncertainties in research due to not taking into account cooking technique or not using the same analytical methods between different laboratories. Just to finish, thank you. I would like to thank the organizers, especially Linda, Mavi, and Tommy for their effort to make possible this conference. I would like also to thank my good friends at NutriScience, Pedro, Carla, Mailan, Monse, and Fernando from NutriScience Spain. And of course, I would like to thank the man himself, Stefan. I'm so thankful to him because he taught me a lot, and especially because he was such a kind person with me, always. I'm also thankful to him. So thank you very much.